With the release of the Greymoor chapter, a new type of item was added to the game called Mythics. Over the years since Greymoor, more and more Mythics have been added to the game, and Mythics have been a powerful buff that rivals 5-piece bonus item sets. Every year, more and more Mythics get added to the game, and with that, more and more specifically built for tank Mythics have been added to the game. The reason I use the word build defining is because of the fact the Mythics have a very powerful buff and also have a very powerful debuff applied to the player. An example and probably the most commonly used Mythic in the game is Velothi. Velothi increases damage dealer's penetration, gives minor force, and gives a 15% damage buff. Along with all of these buffs, Velothi reduces your lie attack damage to do only 1% of their normal value. The reason this Mythic ended up being used so much was because Arcanist was introduced around the same time. Arcanists have a 4 to 5 second channel and don't lie attack very often. In this video, I won't be going over Mythics like Spalder of Ruin and Cryptcanon, as I don't really count them as tanking Mythics, I count them more as just support-oriented Mythics. With all of this being said, we can look at Mythics that benefit the tank only. These Mythics are Bloodlord's Embrace, Esoteric Greaves, Gaze of Sithis, Rorquin's Steam Guards, and Syrabane's Ward. All of these Mythics have one thing in common and are designed to enhance the way tanks play the game. Gaze of Sithis is somewhat on the edge of what I'd consider a tanking Mythic, however I wanted to include it because it does one thing for a tank that is kind of ridiculous and makes no sense. The first two Mythics I want to talk about are Rorquin's Steam Guards and Esoteric Greaves. Both are used to reduce the damage you take. Starting off with Rorquin, because it's basically the easier one of the two to understand, is when you are blocking, you gain a 90% damage reduction to all damage taken for half a second. While on paper this sounds amazing, it has a cooldown of 10 seconds that is reduced to 5 seconds if you successfully block an attack. This means the one thing it could be used for, dot damage, will do nothing for it, as the 10-second cooldown is ridiculous, and if you're not heavy attacked or lie attacked in this time, you won't get the 5-second cooldown. 90% sounds amazing until you realize you have to be blocking for this to proc. Once you're blocking, your damage mitigation goes up so high that the 90% ends up being negligible at best. Now on to Esoteric Greaves. Originally when this set was on PTS, admittedly it was quite OP and probably should have been changed, however the way they changed it made this set completely useless. The way the set works and the way I usually think about it is when you're above 50% stamina, you'll end up with 50% block mitigation without blocking. This is because Esoteric Greaves gives you 50% damage mitigation to direct damage only. Direct damage is blockable. This ends up making Esoteric practically useless, as instead of wasting your stamina on this, you could just block the attack instead. The other problem with this Mythic is it basically adds double the cost to your block, as if you block with it, you'll lose the block mitigation plus Esoteric, so you'll take basically no damage. However, you'll lose both the Esoteric stamina and your blocking stamina. Overall, while these are the two most tanky Mythics in the game, they also don't really work, as they mitigate the one damage types tanks have been already able to mitigate for years now. I really quickly want to go over two more Mythics, and then after go over one that's actually quite good. However, the two Mythics that are just straight up terrible are Bloodlord's Embrace and Gaze of Sithis. Bloodlord's Embrace is in a weird spot because it's actually decent. However, tank recovery is so high as it is now, it's not really useful. But really quickly going over how it works, when you bash an enemy, you mark them. When you get hit by that enemy, you gain Magicka back. The only really good upside to this Mythic is when you're using the Trifocus passive, which most tanks shouldn't be using in the first place. The only reason this is good with this specific setup is because when you have Trifocus, blocking with an Ice Staff makes it so that your Magicka cannot recover. However, this set bypasses this. The next set I want to go over is Gaze of Sithis. This set is terrible. Dropping your block mitigation to 0% basically means in any fight where you have a lot of heavy hitting direct damage, you're just going to die instantly. At the end of the day, this downside is so bad I wouldn't even consider this a tanking Mythic, it's just it gives tanking stats, so I thought I'd throw it in here for the fun of it, but yeah, no, this set in PvE is terrible. On to the last set, Syrabane's Ward. This set is kind of in its own category because it doesn't follow the same rules I had for the other ones. While the set isn't naturally selfish and gives the buffs it gives the rest of the group to you, you can use it in a selfish manner. While blocking, Syrabane's Ward increases your block mitigation by 30%. The reason this set is good is because in some fights, you can end up using this set to gain a massive amount of block mitigation and give it to the group when it's needed. Really, the only fight that comes to mind where the set would be good is the warrior fight on hard mode from Helra Citadel. I would basically still never use this set over other mythics like Spalder and Cryptcanon, however, in some fights it can be fun, and it's just kind of fun to use overall. Also, side note, the effect from this set is cool, and it's really funny when you have about 15 of them going off at the same time in Kraglin, so people who are doing that, keep doing it. But yeah, that's about it. Overall, I feel like tanks don't have a very good selection of mythics designed around things that they're actually going to be useful for them. Most tanks just end up running stuff like Spalder of Ruin and Cryptcanon. These really aren't tank mythics, but nothing that is selfish for a tank can outweigh the benefits from Spalder or Crypt. For example, the only reason Syrabane Ward isn't in the "this sucks and I'll never use it" category is because it does provide a benefit for the group while also benefiting you. All the other mythics in the game for tanks are designed around mechanics and stuff that tanks are already really good at. Magic recovery is not a problem for tanks, and direct damage also is just easily avoidable and blockable by tanks. Tanks already have really good ways of dealing with these type of encounters, like Fallgraven and Zalvaka, with things like Immovable, Fencer's Parry, and anything else that increases block mitigation. This is just my opinion, however, on it. Mythics have always been in a weird spot for me with tanks, basically since Spalder was released, as tanks never really had anything better than it. Cryptcanon kinda took it over in some content, and I want to make a video specifically about Cryptcanon and some of the stupid things you can do with it, but I just felt like this video was more important to make, as the tanking mythics and the selfish tank mythics are just all pretty much terrible. There's no real point to them, and I feel like a lot of this comes from Esoteric on PTS, which was admittedly incredibly OP until they nerfed it, but ever since they nerfed it into the ground, there hasn't been anything even close to the benefits Spalder gives to the group. It's always super hard to justify a selfish thing over something like Spalder, because Spalder does give a damage increase. However, if they could make something that was selfish that did something very nice for like dot damage or like CC immunity and stuff like that, because you have Snow Treaders don't work for most mechanics in raids because they have to be cleansable, and cleansable mechanics don't really exist anymore. I guess I can give a little bit of a peek behind what I'm doing. I've been looking at some funny tanking builds that aren't useful for the group at all. Like, they'd just be terrible builds, but they're funny and kind of fun to play. But all of the tanking mythics that I was looking at using just don't work, really. There's really no point to them. But yeah, that's really the reason behind this video, is I've been looking at the tanking mythics a lot recently. But that's about it, and let me know if you find any of these useful or have any builds that work with them for PvE specifically.